You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 69. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. We've decided not to have a sponsor for the podcast, but if you want to support the podcast and the kinds of things that I do, feel free to visit my Pluralsight courses at seanw.me/psauthor, including my newest course on building a web app with ASP.NET Core. We're almost done with our 25-city road trip. We've had the privilege of interviewing people like Scott Guthrie, Miguel de Acaza, and Julie Yak. We've still got St. Louis and Denver on the map, so if you want to come out and see me do one of these interviews live and talk about ASP.NET Core, feel free to visit hwroadtrip.com. Today's show is recorded in Philadelphia with the esteemed John Petersen. John Petersen has been developing software for over 20 years. It all started when, as a staff accountant, he was asked to get involved in a system upgrade to replace an old IBM Series 1 computer. Those first programs were written in Clipper and in the summer of 1987. John's also an early adopter of .NET, but then decided to go to law school. After practicing law for a few years, John realized that technology was a lot more interesting than the law. Today, John focuses on ASP.NET development and is having more fun than ever solving problems for clients. John is a practice director for custom application development at Neudesic and a trusted technology partner in business innovation. John's also a 9-time recipient of Microsoft's MVP Award. John is also an ASP Insider and is the author of several books and is a frequent contributor to Code and DevConnections magazines. John holds a BS in Business Administration from Mansfield University, an MBA in Information Systems from St. Joseph's University, and a JD from the Rutgers School of Law, Camden. We sat down with John while we were visiting the lovely city of Philadelphia. I wanted to get John on the show because of his experience as both a developer and a lawyer. Today we talk with John a bit about his decision to get a law degree and why he came back to software development. We also touch on some of the pesky issues like software patents and software liability. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's take a listen. Well, I'm excited about this show. We get to talk to John Petersen.
How's it going, Sean?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I've been busy.
We're having some bad weather here in Philly. I see.
This is Seattle East.
Seattle right East. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think we've got as much rain in the last 2 weeks. Last week or week before last, it rained every day.
Every day. Wow.
Yeah, but it's great for the golf courses.
Because it was gorgeous in D.C. just a couple of days ago when we were down there. But as soon as we got on the road, we ran into rain.
I like to think that it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm on your podcast, that it's not metaphorical.
I'm hoping it's not metaphorical. Maybe you can explain the whole deal of that every road in Pennsylvania, every 16 feet goes brump when you drive through. Is there does anyone actually know why that is?
Unlike Maryland and other places where it's like smooth as glass.
Yes.
Yeah, we consider potholes being a feature.
I didn't realize that.
Pennsylvania. Right.
I did not realize that. I drove through Pennsylvania to go to Boston nearly 15 years ago, I guess, maybe closer to 20, and it hasn't changed at all.
I can tell you that when you go driving from Pennsylvania, especially if you drive over the state line to Delaware or into Maryland, it's like night and day.
It is. It is.
And it goes brrr.
My wife didn't believe me when I warned her about it, and we crossed the border. She was like, oh, my God. It was simply amazing.
Let's just say it. Our roads suck.
They do.
Okay.
They do. But it's almost like you bought them, en masse, 16-foot sections of road and just sort of threw them out there.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
So I know that I've known a little bit about your history and that you're not only a software developer, but you're also a lawyer. Which came first?
Software developer.
Did you have like a computer growing up, or did you?
I did. The first computer that I had was a Commodore 64.
Nice. A machine that I personally adore.
And this was, 1982, 83, maybe.
So right near when they got released. I think they came out in 81 or something like that.
Yeah, and this was also the time when Commodore, which was based in Westchester, Pennsylvania, so near
I
here.
didn't know that.
Yeah. And they also had the Amiga, which if anyone remembers the Amigas, they were well ahead of their time.
Way ahead, too far ahead of their time.
I mean, no one understood how to even deal with it. It's like, wait a second, I actually almost have something like TV on my computer here for gaming.
Yeah, everyone I knew that actually got stuff done on an Amiga were all doing creating videos. They had this, I think they called it the toaster, that would allow you to do sort of green screen and other overlays, and so it was a lot of video production.
So I was playing with that. I was playing with the Commodore 64, had a data set, so I'd load programs on with a cassette. I used my little color TV set as my monitor. Now, what was interesting is whenever I loaded a program, I had to turn off the TV set because the electromagnetic interference of the CRT and the TV interfered with the end of file marker on the cassette reader. So it would blow past, you'd fast forward and say, okay, go to like position 15, and then you would load to the next end of file marker.
Right.
But then if the TV was on, it would keep going and then the program would never load.
Oh, wow.
And that was my very first hacking experience. I'm trying to figure out like, well, how do I deal with this? And I'm thinking like, well, maybe if I move it away from the TV, wait, what if I turn the TV off? And boom, it worked. So there you go.
Wow.
There you go.
So it's interesting because we've had different people talk about the experience of the cassette deck for data, and we are so far beyond that we're several orders of magnitude away from technology. Because not only the idea of to a lot of people that we use cassette tapes for data is weird, but a lot of people under 30 have never used a cassette tape for anything. They don't even know what they look like. The logo for the podcast has a cassette tape on it, right? And I've had people go, is that a thing from an old mainframe? I'm like, no, that's how we used to listen to music.
They're actually coming back.
Really?
Yeah, just like vinyl, they're also bringing back, there's somebody who's manufacturing cassette tapes, and they're releasing some music on cassette tapes, just like...
They're missing the hiss?
I don't know, but I understand the vinyl aspect of it.
Yeah. That's really warm
yeah,
sound.
as a jazz... Yeah, I play drums. I'm a jazz musician.
Oh, you know that.
And the old records, the old vinyl,
like going back to 78s, or are you really just talking like 33?
I'm only 51, but give me a break, okay? But that's okay. I get my chops busted a lot on that. But yeah, I don't understand the whole cassette tape thing anymore, but someone's bringing it back. I guess everything comes back in style.
It does. I actually got my wife, I don't remember if it was her birthday or Valentine's Day, but I made her a mixtape. She's
really?
telling me it was Valentine's Day.
Sounds like a scene from High Fidelity.
Yeah, but the mixtape, I went on Amazon and they sold a box that looked like an old cassette tape and had the little piece of paper you could write all the songs on.
Right,
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
But inside was a USB drive.
Of course. There you go. See, there you go. I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was my first computer, and then we had a computer club in King of Prussia area, and there was a...
so you grew up here in Pennsylvania?
I did, yep. Okay. I sure did, born and raised in Philly.
Oh, nice.
And we had a Trash 80 that different people could take home.
Oh, nice.
And so I got to try that out. That wasn't very portable. The whole thing. And then
it was a lot bigger than the Commodore, right?
Oh, it was. Absolutely.
More like the Apple in size.
Yes,
right?
yeah. You know, the keyboard. I think if I recall, the keyboard, and it was all like all one unit. I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So those were my first entrances into computing as a kid and all that.
And did you get the sort of programming bug then, or did you just like the tech, or?
Nah, it was a curiosity for me.
Sure.
I wasn't really programming any games or doing anything serious. I'd write little basic programs like, I can do a for loop and I can do this and that and everything, but none of these things ever really did anything.
Sure.
Some of the programs that I would get with, that you would load would be like little poker simulation games,
right.
And stuff like that. But
so the computer club was more of a pirating opportunity.
I guess, it was it was just,
that's what it was for me.
Yeah. It was just a place to meet people and talk about it. But I think I only went to like 2 or 3 meetings and I got tired of it.
And so when did computers pick up again? Or again, I know that you as a lawyer and a developer,
right?
So you started as a kid with the programming. Is this something that came up in college? Or?
I guess in college, so what happened was, go to college, and at that time the word processing program was WordPerfect 4.1.
Yeah. Blue screen.
Yeah, blue screen. Yeah, not the blue screen of death. Blue screen. So this is like 1980. So this is like 1984 through 88. So we're still 2 years removed from Windows 1.
Yeah.
At that point, right? And so I didn't even really know what a spreadsheet was yet, right? And then I graduate college in 88, and then I'm going to work for a bank as a staff accountant. I was an accounting major.
Oh, accounting major.
Yeah, and so what happened is one of the senior people there, managers at the time, said, "Well, you just graduated college. You know what these things are." This guy, by the way, had a compact Desk Pro 386,
which at the time was
the most powerful
machine.
It was the most powerful desktop that you could get. It probably was a $6,000 machine.
Yeah.
Right? And I should go back in time a little bit. A buddy of mine, his dad worked for IBM, and he had one of the first IBM PCs.
Oh,
and
nice.
we were messing around with that a little bit, but
like the dual drive one?
Exactly. Yeah, the original one. Well, anyway, this guy goes, it's like, well, you obviously, must know something about computers because you were the most recent person to graduate college. I need you to program some macros for me in Lotus 1-2-3. And I said, "What's Lotus 1-2-3?" And so if you could imagine all of us in the tech world, when we say RTFM, we all know what we're talking about, right? But imagine a non-tech person basically saying the equivalent. He's like, /file open, /file save. That's all you really need to know. Well, I did get the manual, and I started programming macros because this is all accounting, so it was consolidated financial statements, so spreadsheet was important.
It's impressive because the idea that you could graduate college in 88 and not know what Lotus is just blows my mind, because I worked for an accounting firm in 87. I think it was 87. It's sort of a computer guy there, but they were still doing all returns by hand and doing the sort of double tape to make sure that all the numbers lined up and all that. Right. And that came in right at that point. So I'm not that surprised.
Yeah.
But Lotus 1-2-3, I would think in a college.
Yeah, and in our business program, and for the record, I went to undergrad. I went to Mansfield University up in north central Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. We like to say where the air is rare. But the two programming classes that I took were COBOL and Turbo Pascal. And I had a horrible teacher for Turbo Pascal. Did not make the course interesting at all. As I go back in time, it's like, I love C#. It's like, oh my God, I was working with Turbo Pascal. I was working with C# back then, basically, right?
Basically, yeah.
No pun intended on the basically, right? But yeah, so.
Is COBOL still on your resume?
No, it is not. It is not amongst the alphabet soup of C#, VB, this, that. Yeah, no COBOL anymore. And so I started programming spreadsheets, and then after the bank, I became an assistant controller and doing really just mostly financial accounting at that point until there was a system conversion. We were the Philadelphia sales office for Trane Air Conditioning.
Oh.
So we had a new system mandated to us, and we had a consultant there. And there was a lot of data importing and data mapping and migration, really exciting work, it's like in the deepest bowels of the sausage factory of where they say, the two things you don't want to see made are laws and sausage.
Yes.
And so this is like interesting, it was interesting to me because I was seeing a level of detail of like where all this data is and the raw data definitions of it. It's like, oh, so that's where that is. Well, I had the domain knowledge of what a lot of these codes meant. So I'm working side by side with the consultant, and he's using a program called Clipper Summer 87.
Summer 87, close and dear to my heart.
Right. And this was my first entree into Xbase coding. And I immediately fell in love with Xbase. And so I had, he left to go work at another gig. And then he called me up to say, hey, Johnson & Johnson, they're in, near Fort Washington, McNeil Consumer Products. They have a opening for a consultant, Progress Software.
Oh, wow.
That now owns Telerik.
Telerik.
And it's interesting because when I found out that Progress took over Telerik, the first thing I thought of, like, Progress is still around, but then
same company?
Same company. But then I remembered our mutual dear friend Keith Elder.
Oh, yeah.
We were in Nashville once, and somehow he found out, or we were talking about Progress Software, and I said I did. He goes, "Oh, we use Progress at Intuit. We use that. So you want a job?" I'm like, "No." I don't want a job doing Progress. So I don't want any Progress. But anyway, I'm a consultant now. So this is 1990, 91. I'm a consultant doing Progress software development. So a 4GL, so forms over data. Right. That's basically what it is. Two-tier, very productive development. And I did that for about a year and a half. And all along that same time, I discovered this thing called FoxPro. And that's where the world found out about JVP at that point, because I basically became a FoxPro consultant and an author and all that stuff. But I started like we all did, just doing line development. And then eventually that bug that a lot of people get when they're in high school, I got it after I was a professional developer, but very junior. But that's when really things started to take off, around 92. And
what was it about FoxPro that just made you, because you had done Clipper before, so Xbase wasn't new to you.
Well, at least now we had a screen builder.
Right.
We didn't have to program say gets and, and scatter, scatter gather, of course, but there were things that, that were very productive. And of course, it was very fast. But honestly,
and this was the FoxPro DOS days. You're not talking
FoxPro
about
DOS. So my first, so I actually was using, I had to drop back at some point because I was using FoxBase Plus for the Mac.
Right.
FoxPro 1 at times, but really the one that I really got started with was FoxPro 2.0 and then 2.5. And of course, that's also when the Windows version, which really wasn't a Windows program.
Right.
It was just bitmaps. It just looked like Windows.
It was in a window.
Yeah.
But
there was no real Windows going on there.
Right.
Absolutely not. So that, and then, but what was really interesting about FoxPro was that the CompuServe Fox forum, and that was my first real involvement with a real community.
Yeah,
that was grassroots from the ground up. And
do you remember your number?
72722,1324 something like that. But it was 72722, yeah. How about you?
I don't remember it at all.
By the way, there was a big deal.
Huge.
Remember when CompuServe allowed you to pick an alias? Like you could pick your names. Like,
it wasn't just a magic number. It was.
Yeah.
I remember it being a big deal because I was in the Clipper space, and I never worked with other developers. I was always the one developer at a company for years. And so when I found CompuServe, it was the same thing. I could actually talk to people who had been through things before I was, or was like, is this really how it works? Or
yeah. And it was a great community, and it had sometimes all the dysfunctions of every other community, but it had all the great things in a community. And I think of the people like Pat Adams and Tom Reddig, who was Timmy on Lassie, but he was a guy who got involved in software in the 70s and was a very helpful individual. Lisa Slater, just tons of really great people. And it was through that community I met my best friend, Rod Paddock, who was on your podcast not too long ago. And so what ended up happening is I went to Fox Teach in Toronto in like 1994. By this time, and I should give a shout out to the guy in the Philadelphia area, Scott Malinowski, who was the one that originally taught me FoxPro. But my first real formal class was at Flash Creative Management, where Alan Greiver, Dan Freeman, Bill House, Rick Hodder, Menachem Bazian, David Blumenthal, a lot of people from the past. If everyone remembers the old, the FoxPro code book, and that was Flash Creative Management. And so, all got to know all these people, which really solidified me in the community and everything. But I went to a by this time I was starting to write for Fox Talk. So I'm doing some programming jobs and everything, and
that all drives the consulting you're also doing, right?
Exactly. And so I was just starting to write and sharing. Basically what it was sharing my experiences, because by this time I already felt an incredible debt to the community, where I got a lot from people, and it's like, well, I want to give back. And sure enough, it's all about paying it forward and all that, and feeding the tributary and all that. And that to me, I really got a lot of, and still do, I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. But the big thing was when I met Rod and I attended his session, and I said, "Hey man, you really explain things really, really well." And I introduced myself and I showed it. He's like, I think I know your names. Like, you write for Fox Talk? I'm like, yeah. The Dr. FoxPro's Answer Clinic. I did not choose that name. That'd be very presumptuous, but the editor, Bob Gromas at the time, gave it to me. But I'll finally cap off this part of the story by saying where Rod goes, hey, are you interested? I'm writing a book. Anyone who's ever written a book, it's great when you sign the deal. For those that write books anymore, not videos, but then you got to go about actually writing the stuff, and you say, what have I gotten myself into? And so he goes, hey, would you be interested in writing a chapter? So I wrote a chapter. He goes, like, you interested in writing another chapter? Are you interested in writing another chapter? I delivered. He goes, what the heck with it? You want to just be a co-author on the book?
Exactly.
So a bunch of us got involved, and that was the Purple Book, and that was the first book project I was ever involved in. And then, fast forward and years and years and years, and, here I am today.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so where did this idea about becoming a lawyer at the same time?
So I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. And by
you do seem lawyerly,
of course.
Yeah, you have that. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, you would be the first. As people that are listening on this podcast know, I have an opinion. I have several opinions, and I'm always more than happy to share them.
Yeah, we know.
But ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a lawyer, and so my wife and we got married in 1990, and then we had our first son in 1991. So little kids around, and our second son was 1995. And, I'm 51 now. So at this time, I'm like, 25, getting up to, getting close to 30. So around 1999, by that time, I had been speaking at a number of shows, and probably been doing that for 5 years by this point. And I was getting kind of tired. And plus I was missing time at home and everything. And I also thought, if if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So
Sure.
I asked my wife, I'm like, hey, I really want to do this. And she goes, and Evelyn's really supportive. And she said, well, if that's really what you want to do. So in 2000, I enrolled in law school.
Oh, really?
And I did it part-time. I was working as a developer. And that took 4 years, because when you go to law school part-time, it's full-time, it's 3 years. Part-time, it's 4 years.
Yeah.
And
it's still a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
It
is. It's a ton of work, and as it turns out, it was still like a ton of time away from the kids and everything. Which by the way, I will tell. I say this to everybody. That was my single biggest regret, is the amount of time that it actually took away from my family and everything. Sure. Because, Sean, I wasn't always this warm, fuzzy person that today.
Warm, fuzzy.
Yeah. The first day of law school, during the orientation, they said, well, you will never be the same. Never. And you need to tell your family that, they have to be prepared for it. And it does change you. I mean, it changes just the way you view everything.
Sure.
So anyway, 2004, graduated. I found out that I passed the bar exam on my 40th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
that's a big day.
Yeah, it was a big day. Was I nervous? You bet. You study all that time, and it all comes down to not one exam, but two exams, because I took the one in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And then I was practicing full time
for a firm,
for a firm, and programming on the side, because I was basically starting at the bottom. I also came out at a time when it was the worst time for lawyers to come out of law school.
There was a lot of them at some point.
Oh my God,
right?
there still is. Look at the yellow pages. Look at the yellow pages. The biggest section in there is lawyers.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's too many
What's
of them.
What's a yellow pages?
yeah, right. What's a cassette tape? And so anyway, but then I ended up working with some really miserable people that just generally weren't happy. I'm like, oh God, what have I done?
Sure.
And so I've kept my license active, but I still handle things occasionally. Sure. Right today I am a consultant working predominantly for one client, not traveling, playing golf whenever I can, and
how old are your kids now?
25 and 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
That time goes fast.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Has your law training changed the way you approach software?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. In terms of writing things or looking at requirements, I treat them like legal. Oftentimes, well, they are legal documents. A lot of times, these requirements and statements of work and things like that. And I look for defined terms. I like to make sure that, if there's something that is to be a term of art for the project, that it's a defined term, and that everyone has the same definitions of it. That it turns out that it's really not so different than like writing user stories and Agile and Scrum and all that. And so it has changed the way that I write software. But the interesting thing is that the way I'll write legal documents and contracts and other things, I use software principles for that.
Interesting. Like Agile, or what kind of
like the solid principles.
Oh,
in other words, single responsibility principle, right? In other words, that a paragraph, it is to do one thing and one thing only. that there are defined terms, that there are no inconsistencies and things like that. No global variables. It's like, that you're just defining things. You're defining things in one place, and you're trying to close the loop, and you're just trying to provide good design principles around that. And so my software training has come in handy, with the law, and specifically in drafting legal documents and things like that, because quite frankly, I've read some pretty bad. and by the way, I have to tell you, I hate legalese. I like plain English.
Well, that's good to hear from a lawyer.
Yeah.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard that from a lawyer. So when I started in development years ago, the idea of the legal ramifications weren't really that concerning to the day-to-day developer, but as patents, software patents and patent trolls and this big thing, the Oracle, Google thing right now has a lot of people talking about
everybody
APIs
that's using Java has the potential of being an infringer?
Yes, in fact. It has kind of exploded, and that I've seen you talk a couple of times about software law. I don't know. I remember what the talk was called, but this idea of what is patentable and what isn't patentable.
Right. So software, there's people that believe that software shouldn't be patentable. It is patentable. Business processes are patentable, and the way that we carry out business process is through software. So the way I like to explain it is the code on paper or on the screen, that's copyrightable. That's an expression manifested. It's in a tangible format, readily ascertainable by somebody else. That's a copyright, because it's not a mere idea. It's tangible. Right. What it does, that's the stuff of patents. And so it just depends on how you look at software. And there's basically two ways to look at software. It's as it's written and what it actually does when it's executing. Sure. So that's very important. But I think the biggest thing that developers have to be, particularly independent consultants, have to be careful about is when they're going in as an independent and they're signing a contract for an engagement, there's representations and warranties. You're representing that the work is original, that you have legal right to use what you're using or delivering what you're delivering because you're delivering this to a client. And in this world of the internet, where the belief is that, well, if it's on the internet, it's free.
You're talking about Google-based development, right?
Right.
Or Stack Overflow-based development. Yeah.
But images, all these things, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm writing an app and there's a nice image and I'll put it in my app and then I'll put it up in the store and then Apple's getting a takedown order, because there's images in this that are owned by us and you have to take this down. But it's very important for people to understand that when you're delivering software and there's content in there, that you have to understand the provenance of where things are coming from. There's Creative Commons out there, and you may have the legal right to use something, but you have to be sure. And there are tools out there. There's using that little advanced search thing that sometimes people never see with Google, but usage rights and things like that. I think that's very important. And the things like when you're an independent consultant and running it like a business and having liability insurance and things like that, as businesses are relying more and more and more on software, they're looking to lay the risk off. Yeah. And it's like, well, you get a contract and they want to hold you liable. Maybe the liquidated damages clause in something is, lost profits, this and that. Well, who the heck knows what that is? Right. I usually make sure those terms are stricken for my clients anyway. So
that's interesting. Do you think it has changed software development any? I mean, other than sort of the big cases, it's just something that, I remember never even being concerned about it. No. But now I don't think it changes the way I do software development, but it does occur to me.
There are other things that probably change the way, like guys like you, me, and other people that have been doing this for a while. Through time comes wisdom, and you start, the things when we were first starting out in this business, none of us gave a thought to where anything could possibly go. And just in general life, we think about things that are different than what we would think of 20, 25 years ago.
And the business people at the time thought of it more as magical because they didn't really understand how it worked anyway.
Some of them still think it is magical and just don't understand that, the Vulcan mind meld or the little red button to do anything, or that it just magically happens. I think that the biggest changes today in software development, one of them is good, and one of them is not so good. I'll start with the not so good. The churn with which we see tools or frameworks going out there. I think there was a lot more discipline once upon a time. Now maybe that's hindsight bias on my part. Maybe I'm completely wrong on that, but I look at things that are being thrown out there today with the assurances or the advocacy around that people should really be betting their businesses on some of this stuff when it's never really been tested, and people are kind of going along with that. And there's a lot of, what do they say about Wikipedia? It's not about truth. It's about notoriety. It's notable, right? That doesn't mean it's necessarily true, but if something is notable on Wikipedia, it's like, well, it stays because, well, people recognize it to be true. So therefore we leave it there. We put it out there. So I look at some of the, claims that are made out there for certain things where there's absolutely no empirical evidence to really support it. And I get very, very concerned about that because there's a group of folks that believe that software development should be a recognized profession, like being a doctor or an architect or
even
an accountant,
a civil engineer
or a lawyer or an engineer, right? Which I say, well, be careful what you ask for because there's malpractice with that.
Right.
There's actually a negligence standard with that. So there's a notable person that I've disagreed with. We know who he is. Can I mention names?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Bob Martin. I totally have disagreed with him on Uncle Bob. Well, I don't call him Uncle Bob. He's not my uncle.
But to make sure people know who we're talking about.
I respect what he's done, but at the same time, this whole idea of professional, I believe you should be professional. And I believe there can be professionalism. But for anyone to voluntarily sign up for a set of ad hoc standards that just brings liability to you, to me, is not a really good idea. But anyway, I think that's one of the bad things that's in the business of software today, with all the cursive choice and with all these libraries and things like that are out there. I think that's bad. And the churn, it's just unprecedented. Now, a good thing that I see is agile principles and Scrum. I'm a big fan of Scrum. I'm a Scrum practitioner. I believe in it. But the idea that businesses, the divide between the business and the technology is, there's a convergence there.
Sure.
And that level of collaboration, because this shouldn't be seen as magic to business people. It's like, look, this is really just simulating reality. That's how I always described accounting. We're simply just trying to capture what your business rules are and workflow and the things that power your business and putting them in a system. It's your idea. It's your rules. It's your specification. We're just simply implementing what you're wanting to have happen for your business against a technological roadmap that we're implementing, and we should be partners around that. That, to me, I see that more and more and more. Unlike the old days, waterfall, go off for 6 months or 2 years, and then come back
5
with something
years.
that in no way, shape, or form resembles what they need. So that, to me, that's a good thing and a bad thing that I see today.
Well, it's interesting because sort of the churn you're talking about, I think, is a product of our success, in that when I started and when I sort of got into the C++ space is probably the best place to describe it, that a line of code was a lot more expensive to write than it is now, because I had to be concerned with memory management and null pointers and all these things that literally we had to have more planning when writing code than we do today, because we're not liable to take a whole machine or a whole set of servers down because of one bad mistake. And so we have this churn because now it is literally easier to write whole things. But I think the the side effect of that is the over-engineering principle, and that is what comes out. Someone is working on a big project and decides to try to take some of the patterns and make it into a framework and go, well, this should be this is probably good enough to be general use, even though it was really good on this one somewhat esoteric project.
Wait,
I'm going to release
a problem from extrapolating from a single data point?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And that's why I think some of the frameworks that are coming out, they all have, if anyone's ever written a framework for anything, they know that it's a exercise in conformity, right? If I do this, this will be easier, but I'm going to make it harder to do this, right? You have to weigh those things. It's a trade-off constantly. Every decision ends up being a trade-off. And so what happens is you look at something like React. Facebook has one very big job, and React does that job really well.
Yeah.
But that is what they're trying to do.
Right.
Unless you're writing something that is so similar to Facebook, that might not be the right approach. Or same with Angular and Google. Google has these sites that are doing very specific things, and unless you're doing what they're doing, it might not be the right approach. So to me, it's sort of finding who's doing the sort of things you're doing to find the right framework. Because I'm asked all the time, should I be using this or should I be using that? And I'm like, you have to investigate everything you use.
You do.
You own all the code, not just the code that you're using.
Correct. And I tell you, going back in time, going back to the old FoxPro days, we had a lot of frameworks.
Yeah.
In the FoxPro world. I mean, the best one that I ever really used and was involved in to a large extent was with Mike and Tony Feltman. It used to be Neon Software, then became F1 Technologies, and Fox Express. And that was a very, very successful framework. It was a successful framework because it was built around, hey, you're building a line of business database. Of course, I don't know of any application that's not a database application of some kind, right?
Sure.
But
forms over data.
But it was forms over data with some, with some object orientation with FoxPro 3 and above, but there was a class of applications, and it lent itself to being a really solid framework, and there were several like that. But what was really interesting is that, let's see. In the VB world, there was Rocky's CSLA.
Yep.
So you had that.
Still is.
And then, I don't know if Paul Sheriff, I think he may have had a framework as well.
He did.
But there weren't many. Yeah. And it was interesting, like these two development worlds that really sat side by side, where one of them had frameworks like all over the place and the other one didn't. And, but I agree with you. It's, you gotta, good frameworks coalesce around something a little bit more narrow than web application.
Right.
It's like, am I writing an insurance application? Am I writing a, manufacturing control process or reporting or whatever? And I guess that's the other piece of it. And that's the one thing that I would like to see more of, and particularly with, now I'm going to sound like the old guy, right?
We are the old guys. Yeah. Just so you know, that was almost the name of the podcast.
Yes, old guys. It's that that there needs to be more time spent, software developers, particularly younger software developers coming into the business, to appreciate that 80% of what we do is supposed to be, I should say, problem solving and listening and understanding a business, and that only 20% of it is really about the technology.
I totally agree. I got into this business sort of accidentally, but the allure was that I was an incredible introvert, very shy, and I wanted to be the guy.
You've overcome it well.
A little. I wanted to be the guy in the dark room at the end of the hallway that helped people, right? But I didn't want to have to deal with people. And the surprise was that this is a people business.
Yep.
I don't know what the number is. You said 80%, and I wouldn't disagree with that number. It could be that high, but we have to deal with other developers, with stakeholders, with customers, whoever. We're building this stuff for people that aren't developers, and so we have to be able to speak to people that aren't developers. Yep. And if you're afraid of people, even if you're a whiz with code, I think at some point you just have to become comfortable with people, and I think that's a skill, just like learning memory management, or just like learning, writing a collection. All of that stuff, they're just skills you have to learn, and you can learn those soft skills just as much as hard.
And you got to recognize it early. And it's also, and again, this is where community can definitely help, and to recognize as early as you can that if you're not good at dealing with people, if you're not good at difficult situations, that it's like, hey, this isn't for everybody.
No, it's not.
But there are also many.
There's always the law. If you,
oh my God, yes. But there are other disciplines. Maybe your thing is not core coding. Maybe your thing is business analysis, or maybe it's QA, or maybe it's something else, or IT, because they're like way back there, right? So like, in the ops area, way down. Was that Milton, right? He was like, we need to move your desk way back down there.
But you do get to keep the red stapler.
That's right. I have a red stapler, by the way.
I don't doubt that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been just wonderful. I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, I appreciate you. Come on up to, specifically, we are in Malvern, Pennsylvania.
We are.
Which is next to Valley Forge. I'm sure some people have heard of Valley Forge and things like that.
All I know about it was very cold once.
Yes, the winter of, I believe it was 1777 through into 1778 was very, very cold. Yes.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
I remember it well. No, I'm not that old. I'm not that old.
I can barely remember 1977, but we're about the same age. So.
Let's see, the 1977.
Star Wars came out.
Peter Frampton, I'm in You. It was a great album.
Exactly.
Right after Frampton Comes Alive. By the way, he's got an acoustic album coming out.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that. Should be fun.
It's awesome.
Well, thanks for having the time to talk about your life. This has been fun.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast.